All right, so let's begin. First, in terms of interpretation, we have two excellent interpreters, Natalia G. Campos and Eduardo Simas. And in order to get the interpretation or the channel you need, if you're on a PC, there should be a globe in the bottom of your screen. If there isn't, click the three dots that says more and select your channel for interpretation, whether it's English or Portuguese. If you're on a phone or a iPad or a tablet, there's usually three dots that you can click on and get the interpretation channel that you need. But again, whether it's English or Portuguese. So with that, and we're going to begin. Hopefully nobody has any problems with using the interpretation. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am Jeff Frank, and along with my comrade, Judith Mirkinson, we will be your moderators for today's webinar. When fascism comes to America, it will be wrapped in a flag and carrying a cross. This predictive quote from Sinclair Lewis embodies today's reality under the second Trump regime. Or perhaps even more bluntly, as V.I. Lenin stated, fascism is capitalism in decay. In the United States, we are facing the ascent of open and naked rule by an oligarchy embodied by Elon Musk, open and unhidden racism and nativism supported by Christian nationalism, and the reduction of the rule of law, even bourgeois law, to executive decrees that are not supported by any law or court ruling. Clearly, the attack on the federal bureaucracy is not in the name of efficiency or rooting out corruption. Instead, the aim is to develop sufficient chaos and seek to privatize the government functions to both increase capital's profits and break public labor unions. While the supported goal of the tariffs is to bring back industry to the United States, in reality, the goal is to raise funds off the backs of the working class in order to give more tax breaks to the billionaire class. Rather than rooting out corruption, the drive to reduce any form of social welfare is to force the working class, poor, and possibly imprisoned to take jobs at any wage to replace the deported immigrant labor force. When completely legal residents, such as Mohammed Khalil, are imprisoned and threatened with deportation, and university professors such as Helia Dulagaj, are suspended for using their guaranteed right of free speech, and scratching a Tesla becomes domestic terrorism, we know that the world has shifted and changed. Fortunately, we are not alone in our struggle against fascism. The rising tide of fascism throughout the world is more evidence of the decay and desperation of capitalism. Our brothers and sisters in countries that have already seen the darkness of fascism provide us with examples of resistance. In support of many of these struggles are lawyers and legal workers who defend social movements and help to build a united front against fascism. The International Committee of the National Lawyers Guild is pleased to present some of these attorneys who have stood with social movements and political organizations in Turkey, the Philippines, Brazil, and the United States. My comrade Judith Mirkinson will present our panelists.
Hi, everybody. Greetings from California, where it's in the morning. I'm going to read, what we're going to do is that we're going to read all the biographies now, and then we'll go from one to the other. And each panelist is going to have around 20 minutes, although several are split, 10 minutes each. And then we will have a conversation between the panelists, and then we will have questions. If you have questions, please put them in the question and answer as rather than in the chat. So Ceren, and please forgive me if I slightly mispronounce your name. Ceren Uysal is a human rights lawyer from Istanbul. She has been based in Vienna since 2016, an executive board member of the Progressive Lawyers Association since 2015. Ceren was awarded the Dr. George Liebesack Prize for Freedom of Speech in Austria in 2016. She is currently the co-secretary general of the European Lawyers for Democracy and World Human Rights, and she is working as PEN Norway's legal advisor on Turkey. Angelo Karlo Guillen is a member of the National Union of People's Lawyers in the Philippines, a litigator who handles cases involving state-perpetrated violations of human rights, workers, and NGOs persecuted by the Philippine government under its counterinsurgency and counterterrorism laws. He obtained his law degree from the University of San Augustine and a master's degree in international criminal law from Leiden University. Mara de Carvalho is a researcher in human rights at the University of Brasilia, jurist member of the Secretariat of the International Relations and National Executive of the Brazilian Association of Jurists for Democracy, or ABJD. Diego Verovato is a lawyer with a degree in law from the Federal University of Goiás, in the first special class of law for beneficiaries of agrarian reform and traditional family farmers. He has a specialization in social rights in the countryside. He is a member of the human rights sector of the Landless Rural Workers Movement, the MST, and the National Network of Popular Lawyers, RENAP, and the Brazilian Association of Jurists for Democracy. Jaribu Hill is a civil and human rights attorney. She is a founder and executive director of the Mississippi Workers Center for Human Rights. She is an author and an international spokesperson on civil and human rights. She has traveled throughout the world to Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Caribbean in support of human rights struggles of workers. Desiree Hosanna has practiced law since 1996. She began her practice in New York City as an IALTA fellow with the Legal Aid Society of New York. She was licensed to practice law in Washington in 2001 and has practiced family law, administration law, and others since that time. She's a fierce advocate, strong litigator, and a person who believes that everyone deserves to have their voice heard in court. She has extensive experience with adult protective services in helping families and professionals navigate its complex system. She has been a judge, a guardian ad litem, and a mediator. That's our fantastic panel. And now we will begin with Turkey with Ceren Uysal.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you very much for this opportunity and the invitation. And I think it's not a coincidence to see some faces that I know before within the panelists. I think this also gives us some ideas about what does it mean to be a grassroots lawyer or a movement lawyer or a progressive lawyer, however we call it. But like, first of all, I'm Ceren Uysal. Yes, I'm originally coming from Turkey, but unfortunately, after 2016, after the state of emergency in Turkey, I had to leave the country. I'm living in Europe now, and I'm still part of my local organization, which is called Progressive Lawyers Association. We will talk about it today. And I'm still working for and working with the people in Turkey who are still fighting against fascism. On like currently, when we are having this webinar, probably at least in 10 cities we have mass demonstrations, and probably hundreds of people are still under arrest because I am receiving a lot of messages today about the number of arrested people in this city. Let's see how many lawyers are under arrest, or whether they can access to their clients or not. So this might give an idea about the conditions, the situations in Turkey, and we will go back to this topic. You know, my organization, the Progressive Lawyers Association, is 50 years old, a very old, very traditional, let's say, in a different way, traditional legal organization, which was established in 74. And I think within these 50 years, we were shut down 3 times, but we never stopped our activities. But whenever Turkey had a coup or a coup attempt or another type of structural repression, let's say, the state immediately comes to us. And currently today, we have around 20 members who are in prison, and one of them is our honorary president, Selçuk Koza. Actually, he's in prison since 2017, and he will remain there for a couple of more years.
Ceren, you appear to be frozen. Jaren, you appear to be frozen. I don't know if you need to go out and come back in.
We can't hear you, Ceren.
I can, can you hear me? Should I go on, or I don't hear you, Jeff?
Okay, we can hear you now.
Perfect. Like, sorry, I have the same situation with my other colleague. I am traveling for a conference, and it's the hotel internet. Yeah. So what I was saying is, and we are using like, I will try to explain you what kind of strategies we are using when we are fighting against fascism. And of course, you know, we are like many other lawyers using the legal topics, but also we have, but we also focus on identifying the gaps and abusing those gaps within the regulations on behalf of the oppressed people or the people who are affected, who are targeted by the state. I will try to give you some examples about this. For instance, CHD has a legal aid team, which is active when there is a demonstration in the country, and we are giving legal aid to the protesters all around Turkey without without asking any money, because for us those protests are in favor of all the oppressed people in Turkey. So we are trying to protect them, and we do not want them to have other representatives than us, because we want to be sure that they are not tortured. We want to be sure that okay, I see the. So this is one thing that we are doing, but in the history, for instance, we also organize demonstrations against the state security courts, anti-terror law, etc. And when it comes to fighting against such tools
Jeff,
of
maybe we
oppression,
should go
we are
on to
not
the
only
next
working at the
person.
courts, or we are not only
Yeah,
filing
Ceren, Jaren, we're having trouble with your audio also. So maybe you can try to reestablish a connection, and we'll come back to you because you're just getting to the heart of your presentation. So So why don't we move on then to
Okay.
Angelo?
Okay, I will.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
Thank you. So why don't we move on to Angelo from the Philippines?
Good day, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me well. First of all, I would like to thank the ones that set up this activity. Thank you for inviting the National Union of People's Lawyers. We are an organization in the Philippines, and we truly appreciate the opportunities to bring attention and share with our colleagues and our comrades abroad the true state of human rights in the Philippines. Before I go into the points that were included in the questions, it may be good to give a very brief description of the social context in which our organization works. Philippine society has, on the one hand, a ruling class that is made up of capitalists and landlords who control the government and determine its policies through patronage politics, through nepotism, and economic power. On the other hand, we also have the majority of Filipinos who struggle to earn enough for their daily needs, for their survival. Do not be misled by claims that the Philippines is a developing economy or that we have a rising middle class. That's not true. Most Filipinos belong to the peasantry. They belong to indigenous groups. They live in poor rural villages, or they belong to the working class and the urban poor. They live in slums in cities across the country. Most farmers and farm workers do not own the land that they till. Indigenous peoples are frequently being displaced because of mining, logging, and infrastructure projects, corporate plantations, and urbanization. Workers in the Philippines, they live on starvation wages set by the government, usually ranging from $7 to $12 a day. And that is if you even get minimum wage, because most Filipino laborers do not even earn that much because they are part of the informal sector where there is no job security or employment benefits. So the government maintains a neoliberal and repressive regime that keeps the majority of Filipinos in poverty and suppress progressive forces. Regardless of the president in power or the administration in power, the Philippine government is always beholden to the interests of the United States and its neoliberal policies. So our policies are always in line with the vision of the United States and Bretton Woods institutions. And because of the decades of exploitation, there emerged an underground revolutionary movement in the Philippines called the National Democratic Front, which is led by the Communist Party of the Philippines. It has an armed contingent that is called the New People's Army, and the government has been engaged in an armed conflict with the New People's Army for decades. However, there are many progressive organizations and activists that do advocate for social change through legal and parliamentary means. Our organization, for instance, recognizes that the legal system preserves exploitation and repression. However, we do operate within the bounds of the law. So what we do as an organization is to provide pro bono legal services to victims of human rights violations, particularly to activists and members of the marginalized sectors. And it is because of that work that we often find ourselves targeted by the government and security forces when they implement repressive and fascistic policies. So how do we combat fascism or repression in the Philippines? We do it inside and outside of the courtroom, and that requires appreciating the nature of the prevailing justice system, its limitations, its opportunities. Like in many countries, the Philippine justice system incorporates liberal ideas at least on paper, it aims to protect individual liberties and civil society from government overreach and abuse. Now, these ideals are reflected in constitutional provisions, in statutes, and the rules that supposedly guarantee individual rights and basic rights. These are openings that we can use as human rights lawyers to defend the rights of our clients and to advocate for reforms. But of course, just like in other countries, including liberal democracies, laws can easily be weaponized to target perceived enemies of the state. State repression in the Philippines is carried out particularly in the name of national security and peace and order. So we're talking about laws and policies that provide the legal framework for counterinsurgency and counterterrorism. That's what the government uses. The government claims that these programs are used to target the revolutionary movement. But the truth is, these laws, national security laws, counterterrorism laws, are weaponized to persecute legal organizations and to imprison activists. And that is why the bulk of our work as an organization is to defend clients in court, to defend them against trumped up criminal charges. So for the longest time, the common charges are rebellion. Later, the government developed a preference for filing cases such as illegal possession of firearms and explosives. It uses these trumped up cases to imprison activists. So in the Philippines, there are around 800 political detainees. So these are people in prison because of their political work and beliefs. Now, the government prefers to use these types of charges for a number of reasons. First and foremost would be to remove the political component of the offense and to present the accused as a common criminal. Second, it is also easy for the security forces to simply raid an office or a house and to plant evidence. Usually it's just a handgun or a grenade, and then they can arrest the activist for allegedly possessing that item, that contraband. So security forces, they come up with these false narratives, and they come up with the perjured statements and falsified reports that then justify the arrest. Another reason that they prefer to use these types of cases is that under Philippine law, these cases are usually not bailable. So an activist, our clients, can be detained for years in Philippine jails that are usually very crowded while they await the termination of their trial. Because trial proceedings in the Philippines and appeal proceedings can last several years, even more than a decade. Now, in recent years, the Philippine government has increasingly resorted to counterterrorism to persecute progressive groups. The country's anti-terrorism and terrorism financing laws are intentionally vague and they are overly broad. So that allows the state to charge, to indict activists, aid workers, to freeze their assets, to designate them as terrorists without the benefit of notice or hearing. And the vast majority of persons and organizations against whom counterterrorism laws are used are not rebels, but civilians, aid workers, humanitarian and human rights organizations. So the effect is that for us as an organization, while we struggle to find ways to defend our clients in court using whatever rules, whatever jurisprudence is available to us, the state continually develops new and more effective ways to persecute activists and civil society organizations. So we always have to be on our guard when it comes to developments in the law. We always have to plan ahead. We always have to consider that the situation can always escalate even after successful court cases. As human rights lawyers, we also go beyond the significance of the case only for our individual client. we try to present the broader context, the social context. In arguing before the court, we strive to shed light on the context of the application of national security and counterterrorism laws. We use emblematic cases. We try to explain the state's motives in weaponizing the law and targeting progressive groups and activists. Of course, it is difficult to do that. Our criminal justice system is not designed to articulate contextual issues, especially state repression and violence. It is hard to litigate social injustices in a criminal case. Courts are instruments of the state, and they are not receptive to suggestions that criminal indictments and the proceedings are being used as methods of persecution. And that is why we have to go outside the court, why we have to develop strategies to bring our advocacy before the general public, and why we have to engage and actively become part of broader movements that advance our shared goals. So this brings us to the second and the third points in the discussion, particularly how we take part in social movements, how we engage with people's organizations, and develop a formation to counter state repression. Historically, Filipino lawyers have always taken part in national movements that advocate for human rights. When our country was under a dictatorship under the regime of Ferdinand Marcos Sr., the father of the current president, private lawyers defended activists in court. They defended rebels, they defended dissenters who were being persecuted under the law. They were also active in organizations that contributed to overthrow that regime in 1986. But afterwards, many of the lawyers' organizations after 1986, they became dormant, inactive. And human rights lawyers took on public interest cases, but usually as individual firms, not as part of broad organizations. In 2007, our organization was established, the National Union of People's Lawyers, partly in response to the escalating human rights violations under the regime of the then President, Gloria Arroyo. But it was also because we recognized that there was a need to consolidate the different regional associations of human rights lawyers and to mobilize them under a common advocacy. And that advocacy is the introduction of genuine social reforms that would address the fundamental issues that are confronting the different sectors of the country. So we're not just focused on the individual cases themselves, but this time the organization was established to actually advocate for fundamental changes. And with that orientation, we also recognized the need to become part of a broader movement that would counter the increasingly authoritarian tendencies of our government. And we recognized that lawyers, as a segment or a sector, could not achieve that goal on its own. We needed to integrate ourselves into a formation that included the basic sectors. We're talking about workers, peasants, women, the youth, even faith-based organizations, academia, indigenous peoples, artists, and groups with progressive aspirations. They may come from different parts of the political spectrum, but if we share common goals with them, our organization has always been open to working with them. That is a practical approach as well, because lawyers, we generally do not have the resources or the machinery to mount a long and grinding campaign that can challenge repressive state policies. Considerable resources and personnel are always required to document, to investigate, and to report human rights violations, especially if these are widespread and systematic. Extrajudicial killings, massacres, arbitrary arrests, and a plethora of human rights violations. They take place not just in urban centers, but most especially in rural areas, in mountainous regions where there are very few journalists who can report on them, and even fewer human rights defenders and lawyers. So it is important that these violations do not go undocumented or unreported. They destroy the solidarity of people's organizations. They weaken their capacity to resist government abuse. And that is the reason that the counterinsurgency operations in the Philippines have as a necessary component the targeting of civilians and civilian communities. So the objective is always to destroy people's organizations because of their perceived sympathy towards dissenters or rebel groups. And that brings about the importance of documenting these different types of human rights violations, not just the killings, but the incidents that take place preceding these killings or leading up to these killings. So, for example, the militarization of civilian communities, surveillance, intelligence gathering, the profiling of leaders and activists in these communities, curfews or restrictions in the enjoyment of civil liberties. So we have an important role in documenting these incidents and reporting them, not just to a domestic audience, but also to the international community. So our organization partners with Karapatan, which is a human rights monitor that has chapters all over the country. We also establish connections with smaller local organizations of farmers, workers, and indigenous peoples. And as a result, we are able to expand our monitoring and documenting abilities. It also gives us another advantage because we are able to have a better view and understanding of the human rights situation in the entire country and across regions and sectors. It enables us to be comprehensive, thorough, and incisive. We also acknowledge that integrating ourselves with people's organizations keeps us grounded. By engaging with the different social sectors, we get to conduct field missions. We visit and stay in communities. We visit impoverished areas and conflict-affected areas. We get to see how people live. We get to see what the problems that they face are on a daily basis. In short, we join social movements and conduct social investigations. And this takes us out of our comfort zones. It takes us out of our law offices, and it keeps us grounded. It keeps us from becoming detached from the social realities and from the lives and the aspirations of the communities and the clients that we serve. And of course, apart from those advantages, in being part of social movements, we have an important responsibility. Because of our training and our experience, we have the capacity to articulate human rights issues, both the problems and the solutions. In that sense, legal professionals are valuable components of social movements. Now, in the anti-fascist struggle, we can assert our positions by utilizing the language of domestic and, most importantly, international law. Often state repression is justified by domestic law, just as it is in the Philippines. Judicial harassment or persecution through trumped-up charges, extrajudicial killings, and enforced disappearances are usually left unremedied because the domestic legal system does not afford adequate avenues or tools to protect the rights that are being violated. Now, many of the violations that are perpetrated in the name of counterinsurgency and counterterrorism laws. So domestic law becomes the justification for repression, and this is where international law can help. While we have no illusions about the limitations of international law and its own conservative nature, there are fields, especially in human rights and humanitarian law, that offer standards which repressive states can be held to account. And as lawyers, our knowledge of what domestic and international frameworks are available, the standards, the mechanisms that are present, this can prove useful in advancing the goals of any social movement. So I will leave it at that. And thank you very much for listening. And I look forward to the discussion later.
Thank you so much, Angelo. Now we're going to go back to Ceren. She's going to leave her video off, and hopefully we'll be able to hear her now. Ceren?
Thank you. I hope that this time you can hear me. Hopefully.
Yeah, it sounds good.
Perfect. Sorry for the interruption. I will try to give you a brief information about my association. The Progressive Lawyers Association turned its 50 year last year and surviving 5 decades within a country, within a regime, a century-long history maintaining an oppositional stance despite repression, tyranny, imprisonment, and even massacres. And we never forget the history we have witnessed, each of us in the association, to extend our lives and professional journeys. We know that it is not only our story, because CHT was established as an outcome of the social struggle in Turkey. It was during 74, and we had a very strong political movement in the country, but of course the state was attacking nonstop, and at the time, the people who were called themselves as the revolutionary people, like the students and the farmers, and they needed lawyers. We even have a song coming from those years that is written for a person who was killed by the state, Deniz Gezmiş, who was a very important revolutionary figure at the time. And the song is asking for the lawyer of this person. So CHT became the lawyer of the political organizations starting from 74. And of course, in 80s, when we had the coup, we were closed and we were called as a terrorist organization. And this was a very dark period in Turkey, and we didn't have any moments for a while because of the repression, and the prisons were full of people, trade unionists, political actors, activists, students. And of course, the first struggle this time started at the prisons. And the prisoners needed support. And this time, CHT was re-established to focus on the necessities of the political prisoners and start to fight with them and start to negotiate on behalf of them, or start to advocate for them, organize demonstrations, and organize petitions, etc. And this and then now still today CHT is very well known about its work with the political prisoners. So we believe that we are representing an alternative legal practice. I'm using the term alternative on purpose because this is a long discussion between us, like how to define ourselves. Like progressive is a very limited term. Should we say grassroots or movement lawyers, or this is but we agreed that we just need to define it as alternative, because both, all these terms have some meanings, but some of us believe that one is better and the other, yeah. So as I said, our history is very parallel with the social struggles, and we are trying to focus on every aspect of the conflict. We are working with the workers, especially we are representing the workers who are working in mines, because in Turkey this is a huge problem. Every year we have so-called work accidents, and we are losing tens of miners because as a result of this. And right now we are following at least 5 different cases all around Turkey pro bono, and representing the families or the survivors. And when I say so, you might think that this is just a legal work, but it is not. I will just share an example with you. In 2013, we had a work accident again, and 301 miners were killed there. The day that we received the news, we decided to go to this small town, and we were there 30 lawyers, and we tried to understand the situation, and it was really difficult to observe. It was really difficult to be there.
And of course, whenever we went there, we realized that the state is trying to manipulate the families of the miners who were killed and asking them to sign some documents, which was saying that the families are not, like, the families do not have any complaint and they do not want any compensation. When we realized this, we understood that we need to make an intervention, and we made a general call to other lawyers around Turkey and explained the situation. And we organized some teams and traveled around all the town to inform the families. We explained them their rights. And the second day, we were almost dying there because, of course, state didn't want us to do this. And when we were staying in a room of a guest house, we were surrounded by civil fascists, and they were almost attacking us. And we were very lucky because the local people came and rescued us. And of course, when state understood that their anti-propaganda and manipulation in the town is not working, then they decided to arrest us. And of course, it was not just a simple arrest. Like when we were organizing a press conference, we were beaten and we were arrested. And what happened afterwards? We became the lawyers of at least 100 families pro bono. We fought with them for 10 years, every 2 months. For 2 weeks, we were there following their trials, and they're our families now. And after a year, when there was a police operation against our association, when my colleagues were under arrest, all those families, they joined the demonstrations, they made videos for us, they became our lawyers in a way. So this is how we are trying to establish things in Turkey. This is just one example. When we had the uprising in 2013 again during the Gezi protests, for instance, we organized all the legal aid in Turkey. We represented 3,000 people pro bono, and people were people were recording our mobile numbers on their phones and saying that, like, without our names. There were only written CHD there, because for them, if something happens, if they meet with a police officer, like, the only institution that they can trust is CHD. But the important thing is how we are doing things. We have very strict principles. We do not make any decisions on behalf of our clients because our clients are not ordinary clients. They are part of social movements or they are part of political movements. So we believe that our role is formulating their political request and translating it into the legal words. So this is one main principle, because we believe that, unfortunately, this is probably a natural outcome of studying law. Lawyers can be very arrogant and they can believe that they know everything. So we are trying to change this. We believe that it is not true. We can know as much as our clients know. We can learn from them, and we can use our knowledge, our academic knowledge, let's say, in favor of the social struggle. This is what we are doing, and we try to make this very publicly known, because otherwise we believe that the social struggles cannot develop, because unfortunately, law has always some limits. If you stay inside the law all the time and if you follow the lawyer all the time, then there will be an end of the struggle, etc. So what we are trying to do is, we have the law, we identify the gaps, we try to abuse it, and then we just put our knowledge in the service of the people. And then, like, in one case, we can just be the lawyer in the court. In other case, we can be the one who is fighting in front of the barricade. And this also happened. In 2012, for a year, the state forbade one main street, which was very important for the public memory and history. And this was the main place where we had the demonstrations. And 1 year, nobody could go to this street to demonstrate. And then we thought that we need to do something. And of course, we applied to the court, this and that, and nothing worked. And then we just wore our robes and we printed out some petitions, which was about the right to right to assembly and demonstrate, and we started to walk on the street. Of course, police tried to fight, like the police tried to attack us, but we were hundreds of lawyers, and after that, that street became again the main street for the demonstrations for years. So this is another way of being a lawyer, and we believe that no one can defend the rights of people if they only focus on the courts, because courts are also political institutions, political mechanisms, and um, if you cannot find other means to support the requests or the demands of the people, then the outcome will not be positive, and we have millions of examples like that. Another principle that we have is giving the chance to the subject of the case, let's say the movement or the criminal case, whatever, to identify the level of the political speech during the trial, because this also depends on the clients that we have. So this is something very important for us. And another thing is the intersectionality. We are trying to focus on different subjects and different issues that we have in Turkey. We are working with the Kurdish movements, Kurdish people. We are working with the trade unions. We are working with the feminist movements, because unfortunately, in Turkey, every day 4 women are killed, at least. Unfortunately, in Turkey, labor rights are very limited. Unfortunately, in Turkey, the rights of Kurdish people are not recognized. Unfortunately, in Turkey, we have torture every day. We have restrictions on freedom of speech. The university students, they do not have chance to organize demonstrations, etc. So, we have to be everywhere. And we are trying to do it, and we are paying the consequences, as I mentioned. A lot of people, a lot of lawyers are on trial or in prison right now. But we still can be quite active. We have around 500 members all around Turkey, and we are working with chapters. We have different branches in different cities. And we have different sub-commissions, thematic commissions. We have migration commission, gender commission, working rights commission, and we also have political educational programs. We are doing 3 of them every year, and also if the trade unions or other kind of political or democratic organizations ask us to do, we can do it more often. One is called as the usual suspect. This is a training that we are giving to the activists mostly, and explaining them how they need to act when there is a raid to their house, or when they are under arrest, or when they are, in a situation like that. And we call it as usual suspect. And we also have a very simple training for the workers, which is of course about the workers' rights, but this is a very creative training, I should say. It starts from the job interview and it finishes with the time when the worker is fired. So, we are giving them some tips about like where to sign, what to sign, how to ignore, etc. So very practical. We are not explaining them what is written in the law. We are explaining them what is the practical issues that they will have to deal with. And we also have another training for the workers, which can be considered as a political training in a way. It is mostly about how to organize, and the trade union law in Turkey is very problematic. So we explain them how to establish a trade union, what to do, what are the risks, etc. And in such trainings, we are always underlining that and always explaining this. And I also want to finish with this. Law is not something stable. Law is also political. And of course, it always has some gaps. And it will, the outcome of one act will be different according to according to the political conditions. Like, I remember a group of workers that we were representing, they occupied the factory. And in many countries, as you know, occupying a factory is a crime. At the time when they called us to to ask for our opinion, we said that yes, it is a crime according to the criminal law. But don't focus on this. If you go on doing this all together, then no court will have the chance or will dare to criminalize you, will not sentence you. And this happened like that because this was all this is the essence of the law, or the essence of the judiciary in Turkey, I should say. And at the time, those workers, they occupied the factory for days and days, and all the other factories around that one, they supported them. And we finished all the process with with a victory and without any criminal investigation against the workers. So this is another training that we are trying to give to the workers. Besides all these, we also have student chapters because we believe that the university students are very significant. And with them, we have the subcommission that is working against the neoliberal transformation of the profession and the limited rights of the interns. And also we have one other subcommission, which is very important, but it is about the rights of lawyers, because we also have a lot of financial issues, very limited rights, the insurance is an issue, etc. And there are a lot of lawyers who are working for other lawyers. And this is a huge discussion because we are calling those colleagues as the workers, and unfortunately, the lawyers who are hiring them, they do not believe us. They believe that lawyers cannot be workers, but we see this and millions of people, like millions of lawyers around the world, they are also workers because they're working for some other people. So we are trying to organize the lawyers for their rights too. I think this might be a very short summary, just for your information. Like last week, one of the main bar association, Istanbul Bar Association, the board was dismissed by a court case, and because they are accused to make terrorism propaganda, and this also gives an idea about how we are working, because they made a statement against Turkey's military operations in Syria. And because of this, they were they were accused of making terrorism propaganda, and they were arrested. And after the hearing, they organized a huge demonstration, and um, it was very important for the people, because again, the people saw that hundreds of lawyers just fought with the police and entered the main one of the main square of Istanbul, which was forbidden for everybody for years, unfortunately. So finally, we are working with a lot of international organizations, because we believe that without international solidarity and without coming together, it is almost impossible to win this fight. But if we can come together and if we can learn from each other, we believe that today or tomorrow, at one point, we will have a chance to change this scene. Thank you. And once again, very sorry for all these technical issues. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ceren. Now we will move to Brazil, and the first speaker will be Mara Carvalho. Mara?
Eu posso começar. Boa
Oh.
tarde.
I can
A Mara
begin.
pediu para eu
We're
começar.
gonna have Diego.
We're gonna start with.
Não sei se o áudio está funcionando e já peço
I
desculpas
don't know
por
if you
não falar
can hear me
inglês.
well. I'm sorry for not
E
speaking
agradecer o
English,
trabalho das
but I
tradutoras
thank you
que
for the
têm
work
nos
of the
permitido
interpreters who
compreender
have been
as
allowing us to
manifestações dos colegas
understand
de outros países. Registro
the expression of
o
our colleagues from
agradecimento
other
pelo
countries.
convite,
I
enquanto
registered the
integrante do
invitation.
movimento dos trabalhadores
Thanks
e
for the
trabalhadoras rurais sem
invitation.
terra,
as a member of the
E saúdo a
MST,
iniciativa de realização
and I
dessa
greet
importante
the
atividade,
initiative of
reunindo
the holding of
colegas
this important
de todo o mundo
activity,
para
gathering colleagues
debater
from all over the
momento
world to
relevante da
debate on
conjuntura
a very
política
relevant
internacional
moment
que se
of
manifesta
the
de diferentes
international
formas
context, which
nas diferentes
manifests
regiões
itself
do
in
mundo
different ways
e
in the
que
different
eu e a
regions
Mara
of the
vamos
world,
dividir o
that
tempo
Mayra
aqui
and I will split
para
our
tentar
time
trazer pouquinho da realidade
to try
brasileira.
to bring a bit of
Pois
the
bem,
Brazilian
o
reality.
Movimento dos Trabalhadores e Trabalhadoras Rurais Sem Terra, o
The
MST, é
Landless
uma
Workers
organização
Movement,
de
MST,
camponeses sem terra que surge no final
is
da ditadura militar aqui no Brasil,
a
no
movement
processo
that comes
de
about in the end
reascenso
of the
de
military
luta da
dictatorship,
classe trabalhadora,
in the growth
junto com
of the
conjunto de
struggle of the working class
organizações
with a collective
sindicais
of
e políticas
organizations
que fizeram, né, a
and
luta
unions and
pela
political
derrubada da
parties
ditadura
that
militar que
fought
vivemos aqui no Brasil de
for the
1964
to bring
até
down the military
1985
dictatorship that we
e
face
desde
here from
então
1964
mobiliza
until
camponeses em
85,
todo o
and since
país
then
em
organizes
prol da
peasants all over the
realização da
country
reforma agrária.
for the agrarian
Pontuei
reform.
aqui
So I
três
mentioned,
questões que me
I've put here
parecem
three
bastante
issues
relevantes
which I think are really
para
relevant
fazermos diagnóstico do
for
avanço
as
e
a
também
diagnosis of the progress
das ações de resistência
and the actions of
frente à
resistance
extrema-direita aqui no
in
Brasil.
face of the extreme right
Como
here in
imagino
Brazil.
que vocês tenham acompanhado no
As I
noticiário
imagine you have
internacional,
seen in the news
nós
internationally,
tivemos em 2016
we've
aqui no
had
Brasil
in
golpe
2016 a coup
parlamentar
d'etat
e midiático
from the
com
Congress and the
apoio
media
de setores
with the
empresariais
support
importantes no
of
país,
important
especialmente de
corporate
setores
sectors,
ruralistas que
especially
concentram
from the
muita terra e
ruralist
que possuem,
sectors
por isso, muita força
that
política
concentrate a lot
e
of land and
econômica,
have a lot of political and
promoveram
economic
golpe
strength.
militar, golpe parlamentar que
They
derrubou
had
a
a
presidenta Dilma
parliamentary coup
Rousseff
that brought
e,
down
a
the
partir de então,
President Dilma Rousseff,
vivemos, né, contexto de
and
avanço
we've
dessas
been
forças
living in a
reacionárias
context of
que já ocupavam um espaço bastante
advance of these
significativo no
reactionary
Congresso
forces, which
Nacional,
already had a lot
no
of
Poder
strength in the
Judiciário
Brazilian
e talvez de
Congress,
forma mais
but
especial
and
nas
in the
Forças
judicial
Armadas.
sector and
Com a
especially
derrubada da
in
Dilma,
the armed
isso se deu num
forces.
contexto também de uma
When they removed
operação
President Dilma, it
judicial
became also
e
in a
policial, né,
legal and
denominada Operação Lava Jato, que é uma
police and
operação que me
criminal
parece que ficou
action called
conhecida também
Lava Jato,
internacionalmente
which
e
is,
que
I think it
acabou
was an
prendendo
operation that was
diversos
known
políticos,
internationally that
deputados,
put several
senadores,
politicians,
empresários
Congress people,
e
senators,
alcançou seu objetivo,
businessmen
que era a
have that
criminalização
arrested a
e a
lot of them and
prisão do
achieved its
ex-presidente, atual
objective, which was the
presidente Luiz Inácio Lula da
criminalization of
Silva.
the
Então a
then
gente teve o
former
golpe
and
da
now
Dilma,
current
tivemos a
president
prisão do
Luiz
Lula
Inácio Lula da
e a
Silva. So we had the
eleição
coup,
do Jair
the
Messias
Lula's
Bolsonaro,
president,
que é
and the
representante
election
da
of Jair
extrema-direita
Messias Bolsonaro,
aqui no
which is a
Brasil, que
representative of the extreme
governou
right here in
o
Brazil,
nosso
who
país
ruled the
durante
country
4 anos e que
during
implementou uma agenda
4 years and
política
implemented
bastante
a
similar com a
political
agenda que
agenda
o
quite
Trump
similar
anuncia
to
agora,
Trump's
né, lá nos Estados
agenda that
Unidos.
he
Então,
now
foi
announces in
discurso
the US.
muito próximo,
So
muito
it's a
autoritário
discourse
de
very
tratar
close to
os
Trump,
adversários
really
políticos como
authoritarian to
inimigos
treat the
que precisam ser
political adversaries
exterminados.
as enemies that
Então,
need to be
o movimento sem
exterminated.
terra, de forma
So the
especial,
landless workers
foi
movement,
tratado, né,
especially,
durante esse
was
período como um
treated
inimigo a ser
during
combatido.
this period as an
Respondemos
enemy
diversos
to be
processos em
beaten.
diferentes
We answered to
instâncias
several
num país
processes in
gigante como o Brasil,
different spaces in
mas
a
eu gostaria de
huge country
destacar,
like Brazil.
especialmente
But
do
I would
ponto
like
de vista
to
das ações de
highlight that,
resistência,
especially in terms
porque
of
isso
the
me
actions
parece
of
que importa
resistance, which
muito,
seems to
além
me
de
really important,
fazermos o diagnóstico
beyond
sobre o
just
método
having a
que a
diagnosis
extrema-direita,
about
que
the
esse
method
movimento
that the extreme right,
neofascista
this
utiliza para
neo-fascist
atacar direitos,
movement
são as ações de
uses to
resistência.
attack
Nesse período,
are the
combinando
resistance, are the actions
ações
of
de
resistance.
luta
So
social e
combining
política como uma vigília que
actions
se instaurou
of
na frente da
political and social
prisão,
struggle,
do cárcere onde Lula estava,
like
assim como diversas
keeping a
marchas,
permanent
atos
hold in front of the
políticos,
prison
comícios,
where President Lula was, and
articulando essa
several
dimensão de
marches
luta
and
social, de mobilização
demonstrations
popular
organized
nas
in this
ruas e nas
dimension
redes,
of
com ações
political
institucionais de
struggle with
defesa,
institutional
processual
actions
nas diferentes
in
instâncias
courts in
e
the
de
different
promoção, inclusive, de
instances
ações que
and promoting
visavam
actions
restringir ou limitar
that
as
sought
ações
to
ilegais, inconstitucionais que o
restrict the
presidente da
illegal
República Bolsonaro promovia.
unconstitutional
Em
actions
alguma
that
medida,
President
conseguimos
Bolsonaro
alcançar a
promoted.
vitória num
At
período
some
de tempo
point, we
muito
had a
curto no
victory in a
Brasil. A
very
gente viveu essa
short
reviravolta
space
do
of
Lula
time.
sair da prisão
We were
e
able to
se
overturn
tornar,
this and to Lula
vitorioso
leave president
nas últimas
prison
eleições
and to
presidenciais,
win the last presidential
diante
elections,
de uma mobilização
facing
gigantesca do aparato
a huge
institucional, principalmente
mobilization of the
militar, para
institutional
tentar
machine,
evitar
especially the
que a
military,
esquerda
to
vencesse as
try to
eleições
avoid
e
that
voltasse a
leftist
governar
parties
o
would win
Brasil.
the elections and
Já nesse
take control of the
período
government
em que
again
o Lula
in
foi
Brazil. So
declarado,
in
né,
the spirit that
elegível
Lula was
e
declared
depois venceu as eleições, quando houve a
able
diplomação
to
dele,
run and
especificamente,
from the spirit when he won
o
the elections
movimento
and he was going to
bolsonarista,
be
né, que a gente chama aqui no
certified,
Brasil essa
the
extrema-direita,
Bolsonarist movement,
estava promovendo
Bolsonarista,
acampamentos
the
na
extreme
frente
right, they
de
had
quartéis
encampments in
militares,
front of the
pedindo que os
military
militares
bases,
fizessem uma intervenção militar, que
requesting the
fechassem, né,
military to do
especialmente o
a
Supremo Tribunal
military
Federal, que
intervention,
vinha tomando
especially to
várias
close
decisões
the Supreme
contra
Court,
o Poder
which was taking
Executivo
several
e, né,
decisions against the
passasse a impor
executive power
regime ainda mais
to
duro.
impose
De forma
a even
marcante em nosso
harder
país foi o dia
regime.
8 de janeiro de
So as a very
2023, 8
strong
dias
date
após
was the
o
January
presidente
8th,
tomar posse,
8
né,
days
para
after
alterar os
Lula
ministérios e
went
começar o
back
seu
into the
governo,
government and
houve a
started
tentativa de um
and
golpe
changed
clássico no
ministries. There
país,
was
acho que também puderam
a
acompanhar pelo
tentative
noticiário
coup,
internacional,
which I'm sure you
milhares de
could
pessoas
see through
com a
international
conivência da
news,
polícia, com o
thousands of
apoio
people with the
da alta
support
cúpula
of
militar,
the
promoveram uma quebradeira em
high
Brasília,
posts of the
invadindo
military
fisicamente a
forces.
sede do
They
Supremo
broke
Tribunal
up
Federal,
many
o
things,
Congresso Nacional
invading
Brasileiro,
the
o
Supreme
Palácio do
Court, the
Planalto, que é
National
a sede do
Congress, the
governo do Poder
Presidential
Executivo,
Palace, which is the
e
headquarters of the
reivindicando
government,
isso, né, que o Lula renunciasse, que
demanding
os
that
militares
Lula would
tomassem o poder.
renounce, that the military
Posteriormente,
would
investigações
assume
da Polícia
the
Federal
government. Later on, investigations by
desvendaram
federal
que
police
havia um comando
showed that there
articulado desse grupo
was
com
a
a anuência
organized
do
decision of
ex-presidente
this
Jair
group with
Bolsonaro,
the
né,
agreement
que
of the former
tinha
president Jair
planejamento
Bolsonaro
muito específico,
with
inclusive com
a
atos
specific
de
plan,
execução
including
iniciados de
acts
assassinato
of
do
execution of
presidente da República
murder
eleito, do
of the
vice-presidente
elected
e do
president of the
presidente do
republic,
Tribunal
the vice
Superior
president,
Eleitoral,
and the
que é uma
president
espécie de
of
figura,
the
né,
election high
símbolo,
courts of
que tomou
justice,
muitas
which is a
decisões
symbol,
contrárias a
a
esse
person that
avanço
took a
do
lot of
fascismo.
decision against
Então, já
the
caminhando para o final
advance
da
of
minha contribuição,
fascism.
nós vivemos hoje no
So going
Brasil
towards the
um
end of my
momento muito
contribution,
importante
we went
de
into a
reivindicar
very
a
important
responsabilização e a
moment
punição
to
dessas
request the
pessoas que promoveram
accountability of these
essas
people
ações golpistas.
who promoted
O
this
Poder
act, those
Judiciário já condenou
actions.
centenas de
The
pessoas que
court
foram
system has
identificadas e
already
presas,
condemned
e no dia de
hundreds
hoje,
of people who
25
were
de
identified
março
and
de
arrested. And today,
2025,
March
o Supremo
25 of
Tribunal Federal
2025,
começou
the
o
Federal Supreme
julgamento
Court
de Jair Messias
began the
Bolsonaro, que é
process of
considerado o grande líder,
Jair
né, desse
Messias
processo,
Bolsonaro,
ex-presidente da
considered the
República,
big
pelo
leader of this
crime de
process, former
tentativa de golpe,
president
de
of the
abolição
crime
do
of
Estado de
attempted
Direito,
coup,
organização criminosa,
abolition of
junto
the
com diversos outros
state as
representantes da
criminal
alta cúpula
organization
ministerial do
together
seu
with
governo
many
e também
representatives of the
militares de
ministries
alta
of his
patente,
government
entre os
and
quais vários
military,
ex-generais e
several
ex-almirantes
former
da Marinha e do
generals
Exército
and
Brasileiro.
admirals of the Navy
As
and
forças
the Brazilian
populares
army.
democráticas no
So the
Brasil
people's forces,
defendem a
democratic forces,
responsabilização
defend
dessas
the
pessoas
accountability of
um ato
those
de
people,
reparação histórica,
including
né?
with as an
Porque no
act of
Brasil a gente teve
historic
problema
reparation,
desde
because
justiça
in
de
Brazil we have
transição,
a
de não
a very big
responsabilização de
problem
torturadores,
of not
de
holding
militares, né, que
accountable people
patrocinaram o
responsible
golpe
for
militar de
torture,
64 e agora
militaries
também.
who were
A
involved in
extrema-direita,
the military
de
coup in
forma
64, and now
bastante
as well,
agressiva,
extreme right
defende uma
in a very
anistia para
aggressive
todas
way
essas
defends
pessoas,
an
inclusive
amnesty to
para os
all those
seus,
people
para
and
suas
even
lideranças,
for the leaders,
e combina, né,
and
esse tensionamento dos
they
espaços
combine this
institucionais, do
tension of the
limite da lei,
institutional spaces
com a
in the
disputa das
limits of the
narrativas em
law
redes.
to the
Então, em grande
dispute
medida, os
of the
processos
narratives in social
judiciais, os
media.
processos
So
administrativos
many of the
de
legal
reparação
process, administrative
histórica
process of
e de
reparation, of
responsabilização
historical reparation and
dessas
accountability
pessoas
of these people
é utilizado como uma espécie de
is
palco
used
para que o
as a
discurso da
kind
extrema-direita se
of a
reproduza.
stage
Então,
for the
no Brasil, de
speech
certa
of the
forma,
extreme right.
concluo com
So
esse
in
raciocínio,
Brazil, and I
vivemos o
close with
desafio
this
das
thought,
forças
we
populares de
face a
defender o
big
poder
challenge to
judiciário
the democratic
no seu
forces and
dever de
to defend
responsabilização e punição
the
desses representantes da
judicial
extrema-direita.
system in
Eu
its
agradeço a
role
oportunidade de
of
participar, passo a palavra para a Mara.
giving accountability to these
Obrigada,
people. So I
Diego.
thank you for
Agradeço
the
também a
opportunity and I give the
possibilidade de
floor to Mara.
participar desse
Thank you, Diego. I
espaço,
really
saudar
thank
os
you for the
companheiros e
opportunity to
companheiras em todo o
participate in
trabalho
this space. And I
muito
greet all
aguerrido
our
que realizam
comrades for this
em
work
seus
that you do
países.
in your country.
O Diego já trouxe pouco
So
do nosso
Diego
panorama, né,
now
no
brought a
Brasil e
bit
como que a
of
gente
our
segue nessa
panorama here
resistência
in
popular
Brazil.
hoje,
How
também
do we continue in this
na
popular
interlocução com a defesa
resistance
da democracia.
in
Mas
the
pensando
defense of
pouco do nosso
democracy?
lugar, né, nós, tanto eu
But
como o
thinking
Diego,
of
somos
looking
formados
from our
na
place,
primeira
both
turma
of
de
us,
direito
we
para
have been
beneficiários
trained
da
in the
reforma agrária.
first
Então, o nosso lugar aqui de
class
advogados e
of law
advogadas, pessoas
students from
jurídicas,
the agrarian reform. So in our
juristas,
place
vem
as
desse chão e dessa
legal
atuação em
advisors,
defesa da luta
and
dos trabalhadores contra
we
a
come from
propriedade
this
privada
ground
da
of the
terra,
struggle
contra a
of the
violação
workers
dos direitos
against
humanos
the
e as
private
violências
property of land,
genocidas, os
against the
processos
violation
de
of human rights, the
criminalização contra
violences of
camponeses, indígenas,
criminalization against peasants,
ribeirinhos,
indigenous
mulheres.
peoples,
Então,
river
nosso
dwellers,
chão,
women.
né,
So
também
our
vem desse
ground
lugar de
is
luta,
comes from
mas
this
também de
place of
atuar,
struggle,
né,
but
em defesa
also
desses
acting in
povos
the
na
defense
mediação
of
com o
this
sistema
those
de
peoples,
justiça. E
mediating the
o MST,
relationship
assim
with the
como a
justice
Via
system.
Campesina,
MST
ele tem um
as well
papel
as
muito
Via
importante
Campesina,
na
they
história
have been
da
having a
advocacia
very
popular aqui
important
no
role
Brasil,
in terms of
considerando
popular
que tem feito
advocacy in
esses
Brazil,
enfrentamentos,
knowing
mas
that
em
we have
diálogo
been
e com a
doing these
possibilidade de
struggles, but
criação
in
de
dialogue
redes
with the
para que
possibility of
possa também
creating
atuar
networks also to
enquanto
act
advogados
as
e advogadas,
lawyers
mas numa ação mais sinérgica, pensando
in a
também em
more
outras
synergic
pautas e agregando
action, also with
advogados
other
também de outros
agenda, and
estados. O
also
nosso
bringing
Brasil é
together
muito grande e
lawyers from
também de
other
outras demandas,
states
mas que tem essa
and
ligação direta com a
looking at
defesa
other
da
needs
luta
also with
dos povos.
this
Então, essa tem sido uma primeira
direct
característica
connection of the
da
struggle of
advocacia
the
popular no
peoples.
Brasil
So
e de
this
como
is
a gente vem
characteristics of
trabalhando com
people's
isso
advocacy
e
here
com
in
isso
Brazil and have
também de
been
como que a
working with
gente
this,
amplia,
and
né, para
how
um
do
processo
we
também de
widen this
sensibilização
to this
dos
process of
atores do sistema de
sensitizing the
justiça. A Rede
actors
Nacional
of
de
the
Advogados e
justice
Advogadas
system,
Populares é um
the
exemplo disso,
national network
mas ela
of
é também essa
popular
possibilidade de
lawyers is an
mediação
example
com
of that,
juízes,
but it is
procuradores
possibility of
e outros
mediation with
atores que também têm
judges,
esse dever
attorneys, and other actors which
prestacional de atuar
have
conforme a lei
this
e conforme os direitos
duty of
desses
acting
povos em
according to the
situação
law
de
and according
violação.
to the rights
Uma
of those
outra
peoples in
ação
the
que a gente
situation of
também tem
violation. Another
trabalhado muito
situation
aqui
that
no
we have
Brasil
been
ao longo
working a
dessa
lot with
história
in
da
Brazil
RENAP, de outros grupos,
along this
é
story from the
as
Renata and
possibilidades de
other
atuação
groups is
conjunta
the
em casos
possibility to act
emblemáticos. E
together
como que
with
a gente também tem
emblematic
criado
cases. How
essas
we have
teias de
been
redes que extrapolam os
building
espaços
these
da
networks
assessoria
that go
jurídica
beyond
popular, mas
just
também
the
cria
legal
interlocução com as
advisory, but
instituições,
also
com
brings
ONGs, com
dialogue with
organismos
institutions,
internacionais de direitos
NGOs, and
humanos, de
international
forma que a gente
bodies,
possa
human
criar
rights
teias
bodies,
de
in a
enfrentamento,
way that we can
pensando
create
também
networks
a
to fight,
jurídica,
but
que a
also
gente
thinking about
precisa
legal
também
mediation that we
pras
need
defesas necessárias que
to
precisamos.
defend.
Trazemos aqui como exemplo o caso do massacre
And
do
so we
Eldorado
need,
dos
we call, for
Carajás, que é
example, the
exemplo muito
case of Eldorado
emblemático
dos
de um
Carajás, of the
massacre de morte
massacre,
de muitos camponeses
which
no estado do Pará,
many,
e que
where
contou
many
com essa
peasants were
possibilidade
killed
de
in the
uma
state of
atuação em
Pará,
rede,
where we
e que
had this
buscou,
possibility to
inclusive,
act
né,
as a network and sought
possibilitou as possibilidades
and
de
gave the
condenação, de
possibility to have
responsabilização
a
em torno
condemnation
do
and
caso
hold
emblemático de uma morte
accountable
coletiva no
in
campo de
in
trabalhadores e
in terms
trabalhadores
of an
camponeses
emblematic case
camponeses.
and murder
Com
of
base nisso
peasant men
também,
and women.
nessa teia, né, de pensar a
And
cidadania
based in
jurídica
this
popular
network,
e a
this legal
atuação em rede,
advisory
a gente tem
and
trabalhado
acting
muito
as a
também
network
com
that we have
processos
been working also a
formativos, de
lot
como que
with
essa
training
atuação
processes,
do aprimoramento técnico,
how
político,
to
jurídico,
improve
ela tem que ser
technically,
também uma ação
how to have a legal and
constante para
technical
essa atuação
improvement
enquanto
that
advogados
needs to
e
be a
advogadas. Não só pensando a
continued
parte técnica
update for
política, mas
lawyers,
também
not
criando
just
teias
the
e relações
political
com
and technical
universidades
aspects, but
públicas da
creating
formação,
alliances and
inclusive, de
networks with
advogados e
public
advogadas
universities to
indígenas,
train
quilombolas,
indigenous
campesinos e
quilombola
campesinos que
and
possam atuar
peasant
como operadores
lawyers that are
jurídicos
able
a
to
partir
act
dessa
as legal
realidade. Então, temos essa
operators
experiência aqui
coming from
no
this
Brasil,
reality. So
que
we
tem
have
sido algo
this
muito
experience in
importante e
Brazil, which has
relevante,
been very
de como que a gente
important
também cria
and
quartos
relevant
nessas
of how
comunidades,
we
tira pessoas
create,
desse
also
lugar
bring
de
people from
violações
these
para
communities,
também
take
trabalharem
people from
como
these places of
operadores jurídicos e
violation,
defenderem
also to work
as
as
suas
legal
comunidades.
advisors and
E
defend their
dentro
communities.
dessa teia,
So
pensar
inside this
também
network, also
a
thinking
problematização
about
não
the
só de uma atuação individual,
questioning
pensando
the not
os
just
tribunais, mas
individual
também criando uma
action,
agenda de
thinking about
conformação e
courts, but
problematização
also
sobre a própria atuação
creating
do sistema
training
de
agents
justiça,
and
porque
questioning the
aqui no
very
Brasil ele
action of the
de uma elite
justice system.
branca
Because here
e
we
de
are talking
homens,
about a
e como que a
white
gente também nesse
man
lugar de atuar
elite
enquanto
that
advogados e
holds the power in the
advogadas também
system, and this
pensa
possibility
aqui
of
no
acting
caminho
as
também de
lawyers has also
problematização,
going
de
through this path of
democratização e acesso
questioning,
à
democratizing,
justiça.
and access to justice.
Conformação e nesse caminho de uma
In this
agenda,
context
né,
and
que
in
se
this
conforma
path of
dentro
having
dessas
this
redes, mas
agenda
de uma agenda
inside
maior,
these
né,
networks,
de
but
pensar
also a
também
greater agenda
essa
of thinking
atuação do
about
sistema
this
de
action
justiça
of
que
the
vem
justice
então a
system,
criação da
there it
Associação de
comes
Juristas
then
pela
the creation
Democracia,
of the
né, da qual eu
Association
faço
of
parte aqui,
Jurists for
represento, que
Democracy,
vem
which I
muito
am part
também
of,
desse
and I
lugar, desse
represent,
contexto
that
que
comes a lot
Diego
from this
trouxe,
place
e
that
da
Diego brought,
necessidade
and the
também
need
de congregar
also
carreiras jurídicas em
to
defesa de uma
add,
pauta maior, que é a
to
defesa
bring
do Estado
together
democrático de direito,
legal
da
careers for
democracia e
greater
mais que
defense
isso,
of
do
the
interesse,
democratic
né,
state of
dos
democracy and
povos
the interests of the peoples
resistem e de uma
that
agenda também, né,
resist, and
em
with
conformação com a luta dos
an
movimentos sociais
agenda
do campo e
that
da
goes
cidade.
together with the
Então, nesse
struggle of
sentido que
social
surge, então,
movements in the
a
countryside
BJD, com o
and in the
contexto do golpe em
cities. So
2016,
ABJD
foi
comes
criada uma
from this
ampla
context, from the coup
de juristas,
d'etat
agregando
in
várias carreiras
2016,
jurídicas, não só
a
advogados,
very
e
wide
aí, por
legal
isso,
front,
então, nessa
not just of
denúncia,
lawyers,
né, do
but all
uso da
different
lei contra a
careers
lei
in the
do
justice
lawfare,
system.
que estava
So
permeando o
denouncing
processo contra o então
the law
preso
that
político
was
presidente Lula. Então,
the
em
use of
2018 se
laws that
consolida
were
a
managed to
BJD
put Lula in
como um
prison.
espaço,
So
né,
in
que agrega
2018, this
juristas
association was
de 6 carreiras
consolidated
jurídicas,
as a
incluindo
space to
inclusive
bring
professores
together
e estudantes,
jurists
para
from
que com
6
isso tenha
different
assim uma agenda
careers, including
contínua de
teachers and
defesa da
students, to have a
democracia, de
continuous
denúncias
agenda in
de
the defense
tentativas
of
de golpe contra
democracy
o
to
fascismo, mas
denounce
não só,
the
de uma agenda de possibilidade de
tentative
democratização do
coups
sistema de
against
justiça,
fascists, but also
alinhados
democratizing the
aos
justice
interesses
system,
dos povos do
aligned with the
campo, da
interests of the
cidade,
peoples
e
from the
numa
countryside,
sinergia
from the
direta com a
city,
agenda das frentes
and
populares
in a
jurídicas
direct
que hoje
synergy
existem
with the several
no
fronts,
Brasil.
popular
Então, essa é
fronts of
pouco da
struggle that
nossa, do
exist in
nosso
Brazil.
caminhar
So that's a
aqui
bit of
no
our
Brasil.
path
Temos tantos outros
here in
elementos
Brazil.
e exemplos
We have
e
many
super
other
agradecemos
elements
esse
and
espaço,
examples, and we
né,
really
com as
thank you for
experiências
this
também de
space with the
Filipinas,
experiences also from the Philippines, from
Turquia, de como que a
Turkey,
gente também encontra algumas
of how
possibilidades também
we
de
can
sinergia
also find
em coisas também que
possibilities to
fazemos
act
desde o
together and
Brasil. Muito
things we do
obrigado,
from
desculpa me
Brazil.
alongar.
Thank you so
são
much.
esses
Sorry
elementos
for
que a
going
gente
too
traz
long.
aqui
So
para
these are the
vocês,
elements
para
that we
dialogar, que
bring to
estamos à
you
disposição para
to
qualquer
dialogue, and we are here available for the questions.
Thank you so much, Mara and Diego. I'm not sure, Desiree and Jaribu, which one of you wants to go first? But take it away.
Hi, Judith. I'll start. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important discussion. In addition to what you saw in the bio, I'm also a member, a recent board member of the Mississippi Workers Center for Human Rights, which is an organization that was founded and began by Jaribu in 1996. The center's goal is to provide legal advocacy and training for low-wage Black workers in the Mississippi Delta, utilizing direct action and public awareness campaigns to really bring light to the rights of workers to live and to have a life that is a life used with a living wage. And so one of the things that you will hear a lot about the center is that we reject all forms of capitalism, our theory for change is rooted in anti-racism, anti-imperialism. We reject all forms of discrimination, including racism, sexism, xenophobia, homophobia, patriarchy, ableism, all of those things which impact the rights of people to live in a society. When I think about what the impact of grassroots lawyers, what our role is to use the law to effectuate change, irrespective of where that change is, to make life better for those who don't have the privilege of being an advocate, of being a legal advocate. I think that, it is a privilege to have the ability to represent the rights of individuals and organizations to make this world what it should be, and not only what we wish it to be. I think it's also important to have effective grassroots lawyers to maintain effective advocacy strategies, and those strategies should include a global, domestic, as well as international campaign. I think particularly given what we have happening here in the United States currently, I think it's critical for grassroots attorneys to really dig deep, to look at our history, and not just the history of a struggle in the US, but also international struggle, and to link arms with our brothers and sisters in the struggle across the world. Yes, the sacrifice that individuals make, particularly those who are incarcerated and who face, governmental subjugation is huge, but we still have the opportunity to use our intellect for the greater good, and I think that is an important thing to focus, particularly now. I think we have to continue to embrace a greater synergy, if you will, to address the attacks that are coming along on public institutions, to address the attacks that are coming against, obviously, even big law. Because we have an individual, or we have individuals who want to maintain the power structure for themselves. And I think it is incumbent upon grassroots lawyers to continue the fight. Someone utilized the term weaponization of the legal process. And we see that internationally, we see that domestically. We have individuals who are using the legal process to undermine basic principles of the rights of people to exist. Certainly, I also think that grassroots lawyers, I think that we have to expand out of our comfort level, if you will, in terms of what we practice. And for me right now, I think a lot about, expanding my practice to include support for immigration lawyers, because it is critical for us to have individuals who understand the law to also help people who are facing, deportation. And so I think for grassroots lawyers, we've always been able to, or been willing to, branch and speak out and go outside of the box. And now more than ever, it is critical for us to utilize lawyers, to utilize student lawyers, to really engage in solidarity with all just causes, not just any cause, but causes that are just. And so, it's important for us to include in our community everyone and anyone who's interested in making this world better and who's willing to utilize the resources that they have. I think we have to get back into a more collective utilization of resources, that we, as grassroots organizations, we have to support one another. And sometimes that means the organizations that have more resources available to them, we have to start contributing to other resources, other organizations who have less resources. We can't we have to all, I think, have the philosophy as best we can that all of us can get there, and we all can get there if we're all working together to make sure that we are all there at the same time. And I think that that's critical. I think at the end of the day, we have to continue to resist the efforts to engage in othering, to minimize the rights that seeks to minimize the rights of marginalized communities. I think it's important that access to justice really means that there's access to justice for all. And that means we have to really be willing to bring along everyone and to educate everyone. I think those are just some of the critical pieces that's important, because we have to be determined in this society, in the world that we're in. We have to be determined to succeed, and that success has to be for everyone, not just some of us. We all have to have that commitment. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Jaribu Hill.
Thank you, Attorney Desiree Hosanna, magnificent advocate and freedom fighter in our struggle. I think it's important to say that both Desiree Hopkins, Hosanna, and myself are rooted in the Deep South, my family from the Mississippi Delta and hers from South Carolina. And so we understand things in a slightly different way regarding the belly of the beast and where we are working in the belly of the beast, and how our work has to be different from the normal, traditional, sort of whitewashed and slave mastered up legal practice, to go straight to the heart of the suffering today that resembles in many ways the auction block from years past. And so we've been litigating cases in the Mississippi Delta, as Desiree mentioned. We've been litigating in the state of Mississippi, not only in our region, which is the Delta, where 43% of the population languishes in poverty, but we've been litigating across the state to try to change the culture of work, partnering up with the dispossessed, partnering up with the sufferers to address modern day forms of terror, 21st century terror in workplaces, where we've sued the largest employer in the state, which is a quasi-government entity, a shipyard, where for 40 years it was allowed that racist white workers who had Confederate flags painted on their hard hats would in fact attempt to lynch Black people at work in the 21st century. And we were proud to stand with some of those Black workers and even represent some of the victims of those attempted lynchings and beatings and other forms of annihilation and isolation in the 21st century. We also were privileged to represent representatives of the Till family. As you know, the Emmett Till case is still unresolved, regardless of the fact that the predator who started it all, Carolyn Bryant, is now deceased. She was allowed to escape without punishment. And that is really how justice, or the lack thereof, in the state of Mississippi is described. That case is the backdrop upon which we rest. And so for us, the history of our organization, nearly 30 years of standing on the side of the oppressed. Over the course of these years, we have worked diligently in the fields, as Desiree pointed out, education, advocacy, and organizing. And we believe in client-centered lawyering. And we understood that from our original teacher, one of our original teachers, our ancestor now, Chokwe Lumumba, who really recruited us as law students to come to Mississippi and start a project that would address what we call extrajudicial lynchings that were occurring in jails across the state of Mississippi. So that's how we cut our teeth as people's lawyers here in this state, where we represented some 5,000 African Americans who were victims of, as I said before, attempted lynchings at work and Jim Crow assignments at work. We've seen the white militias at the workplace, on the floor of the plant. We have seen Jim Crow work assignments. We have seen resistance to all of these practices and to all of these predators. We have seen that resistance, and I would call out and shout out moments in terms of that resistance, so that we can place our history squarely in the context of what we are doing now. So we have seen and continue to see murders under the color of law, and we do see people's lawyers stepping up and representing the victims of those, the family members of the victims of murders under the color of law and murders under the color of white terror. We also know that we are in a police state. So to say that fascism is rising, we know that fascism has always been present. And because we believe in dialectics, we know sometimes it is on the low end, sometimes it's in the ebb, and sometimes it's in the flow. But fascism, since the beginning of this illegal project, has always been around. And so stealing people, trafficking people to work for free to build the empire, of course, that is a feature of fascism. That's a feature of the theft of humankind to build something that is so diabolical. And so we lift up resistors like the Puerto Rican nationalists, the Charleston Five, Cuban revolutionaries, those who fought counterintelligence under the name of the COINTEL program, Black Panthers, Black Liberation Army members, Republic of New Africa. We lift up our liberation arm, the National Conference of Black Lawyers, and we say that this is the type of lawyering that we need now. We need lawyering that does not shore up reform, but lawyering that actually gives voice to the cries of the sufferers and the resistance of the sufferers and the courage of the sufferers. Many times, because of our class privilege and our ability and our tendency to vacillate as petty bourgeois professionals, many times we push back and hold back when the masses are saying, no, go forward, don't stop. Even with the boycotts, we've heard people say things like, well, you know, they're not organized. They're boycotting, but they're not doing it the way Dr. King did it. Hell, if Target can have a bad quarter and Walmart can have a bad quarter, we are achieving the victories that we need to be achieving in this period. So we believe that these organizations that are time-honored in our struggle, the We Charge Genocide movement and others that were coined so long ago, established so long ago, and still needed today when we talk about Palestine and how both parties in the duopoly have been responsible for bankrolling the bombing and the killing of brown children. And in this country, we can go to the Jim Crow systems and see how our children are denied access to decent education and are doomed to be pushed out into a world without being equipped to succeed. And so the diaspora Algeria, the Congo, South Africa, Namibia, African liberation, the history of it in this country. As we continue to understand our place in the world and know that we're in the belly of the beast, we humbly offer ourselves and our perspective. We humbly offer our learning and our being coached by you, comrades on the screen, who have told us so many times the horrific consequences of the U.S. imperialism project and how its tentacles are spread throughout the world. And we would be remiss if we did not say that we step aside and step away from that. As Desiree so eloquently told you, our theory of change is to be against all those things that would crush the oppressed, that would crush the dispossessed and deny us our rightful place in this world. And we also know that, as I close, we also know that because we are students of Amilcar Cabral, who told us if we are going to be of any value at all, we must commit class suicide. So we know that lawyers in general will not be the ones making revolution, but we must listen to the voices of our people, let them guide us. Be humble enough to learn. Fannie Lou Hamer is one of our teachers. She was a 6th grade scholar who never went past the 6th grade. She sharecropped, and she also is the reason why many of us can touch the screen, pull the lever, and vote today. So those resistance forces are what we honor in this moment. And we thank you for pulling this platform together. And we say we just need more opportunities to not only share our perspectives, but to validate and confirm that there is a fight, there is a struggle against the forces, not just of evil, because that would demonize them and make them almost mystic, but against those forces of oppression that continue to beat us down and hold us down. We will not be held down. We are energized in this moment. The Orange Man is not operating in our circles. The Orange Man is not controlling what we are about. We are resisting, and we're daring to struggle in a place where 43% of the population languishes in poverty, languished in poverty before Trump, languished in poverty after Trump. And what are we doing to make sure that we're not traumatized to the point where we are paralyzed? And we need to be kicking ass instead of being paralyzed. So thank you. I thank my comrade Desiree Hopkins Hosanna, who undersold the work that she is doing in a region that is very difficult. She has been a tribal judge, standing up for our indigenous brothers and sisters. As a woman from Africa, she understands her calling as someone who has been treated the same way as our people have been treated historically. So thank you for giving us this platform and this way of sharing our thoughts today, in solidarity with everyone today and every day, and anything that we can do to help bring things to a head. We will stand with you at every turn. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I want to thank all the panelists for their amazing presentations and enlightening us all on the struggles going on around the world against fascism as it exists in its many forms. So I'm going to try to consolidate some of the questions that have been asked and throw it open to the panelists for some interaction. So some of the questions, and I'm going to lay the questions out and let you all kind of work it out as you discuss them amongst yourselves for our benefit. So there's some questions about the role of lawyers combining their political ideology with the law, which is so conservative, and still be able to serve their clients and try to bring some form of justice. There's other questions about how is it that that in the Philippines, Duterte has been brought against for international justice, and in Brazil, Bolsonaro has been is being brought to justice, while in other places such as Turkey and in the United States, those fomenting the oppression, fomenting forms of genocide have not been brought to justice. And also that, we want to know some of the important lessons that you have had. What advice would our international colleagues, as well as our sisters here in the United States, do to what are the important lessons they've learned in terms of fighting back. Given the time remaining, I think that's probably more than we'll have time to discuss. But I wanted to open it up and to the panelists to try to grapple with those questions that we're struggling with here in the United States, and also throughout the world, people are struggling with. Thank you. Don't be shy. Go ahead. I can call on somebody. Okay, Angelo, I'll call on you just to sort of to open up this question about international law and how it's been effective apparently in the Philippines, but we find it have no effect here in the United States, for example.
Well, particularly as to President Duterte, we always emphasize that this is merely one occasion of a particularly powerful individual being held to account for international crimes. But that does not mean that the other perpetrators are also being held to account, because right now it is simply politically convenient for the current administration, that is a rival of the Duterte family, to bring him before the Hague, to facilitate his surrender, and to facilitate the prosecution before the ICC. But the progress in that case does represent an opening for the thousands of families who have been victimized by the war on drugs, and it represents progress in terms of the efforts that were made by the human rights organizations and defenders in the Philippines. However, we want to point out that we have a long way to go before we can say that the justice system in the Philippines or international law is actually working to address human rights violations. We have to remember, just going back to your question about the nature of the law and how we try to apply it, considering our different ideologies. I personally believe, and I'm sure many of our colleagues here do as well, that the functionality of law can be extended to advance progressive goals, all right? But the true purpose of the law is to preserve the status quo. And in a capitalist system, that means maintaining the system of exploitation and oppression. We can have some victories here and that every now and then, but the objective is always to make fundamental changes. And in that sense, we still have a long way to go in achieving that goal.
And I would just add a couple of quick examples of the way we've been litigating here in the Deep South. When we sued the largest employer in the state, we were able to get in through a preamble of our complaint, a citing of a CERD violation that, in fact, the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination was violated when nooses were displayed and people were attempted to be lynched in the workplace, that those were not only badges and incidents of slavery under the 13th Amendment, but also were in defiance and in violation of international law. The other time I can recall where we were able to turn the law on its head, in the sense, because we always approach these courts as though they are still Dred Scott courts. But the other time was when we sued the Klan, and we were able to get a permanent judgment enrolled in the state of South Carolina, where the language of the judgment indicates that if any Klansman or Klanwoman or whoever were to actually attack a Black person in the state of South Carolina and they were members of the Christian Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, they could be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and their implications about incarceration, criminal fines, and so forth. So those were two times when we felt like we were able to use the law in a way that normally it is not intended to be used. But I think my comrade Angelo said it best. It is true. These laws do not obviously are not the laws that were established to protect our people, and we have to step outside of those laws many times in order to do so.
I'll just add something. I think this is really nice to speak in front of such, like, together with such colleagues, because, we do not need to repeat ourselves. Like, it's clear, like in Turkey, when you consider the bourgeois law itself, like, we do not have an independent judiciary as they define. I personally do not believe that there is an independent judiciary, but, there should be some criteria, and we never had it. Our courts were always working as an instrument of the state against the Kurdish people, against the Armenian people, against the poor people, like working class people, etc. After 2016, something changed because, before the courts were targeting only the political actors, revolutionary people, etc. After 2016, 3,000 judges and prosecutors were dismissed from the judiciary because of an internal conflict between the power. And what happened then? Now we have judges and prosecutors who are afraid of the consequences of giving a so-called independent judgment. So they are now applying law according to, like, in favor of the state. And now ordinary so-called, when I say ordinary, I'm talking about, any person who doesn't have a case which can be linked to any political situation, they are also suffering because, we have nothing, no safeguard, etc. When it comes to the international law, Turkey is part of the European system, so we are part of the European Convention on Human Rights, and we are using the European Court a lot. But again, the discussion that we are doing about the domestic system is also valid for the international one. European Court of Human Rights is a very political institution, like, again, and a very simple example, after 2016, when we applied to the court for the dismissed academics, they were dismissed from the public office just because of signing a peace declaration, thousands of them. When we applied, the court said that we need to exhaust the domestic remedies, which is the general rule, as you know. But at the time, we didn't have a domestic remedy. And the judgment referred a feature remedy that they were negotiating with the country, but this was not there at the time. So these international courts are also political mechanisms. We need to be very aware of this. Final thing, alternative ways, like, for instance, tomorrow there will be a press conference in Brussels. This is the reason why I'm here, because some months ago in February, we organized a tribunal against Turkey concerning Turkey's war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crime of aggression in Syria against the people of Rojava and people of Afrin. So tomorrow the verdict will come. Because Turkey is not part of the Roma status, we cannot go to the other mechanisms. So we decided to establish our own court system, and we are trying to be creative because we know that if we just stay in the box, then nothing will change. We always need to focus on the outside of the box.
Mara, Diego, would you like to weigh in, please?
Yeah, we can, about the question about the paths of an accountability. That's a discussion we have been having here in Brazil, with a constant debate on the denunciation of the crimes during the military period. So the agenda of the amnesty and the possibility of denouncing the process of making accountable has generated a discussion in Brazilian society in terms of putting pressure on institutions to make accountable those criminal actors in a way that it never happens again. So we have marks of several people dead and disappeared in Brazil, and crimes practiced by the military, which were not held accountable until now. And this has created a strong agenda from on behalf of the institutions to hold these people accountable, considering the spirit of strengthening extreme right with the Bolsonarism and its direct alliance with the military forces. This also brought a discussion in the defense of democracy, but also in line with this possibility of holding these people, even Bolsonaro, accountable for the crimes he committed during the democratic period. So the acts of January 8th, they came also in a moment of the democratic takeover with the victory of Lula, and the institutions also in the legality, which was not happening during the former government led by Jair Messias Bolsonaro. So the institutions again engaged with legality and with the laws in our 88 Constitution and our constant struggle in the defense of democracy and institutions, in the strengthening of the democratic state of law, we consider it as an important path to the possibilities of holding these people accountable, because we have a continuous agenda in terms of those crimes and those denounces. So, and how this should not stay just in the hand of the institutions, but also it has to go with the public agenda of surveillance of civil society to hold accountable. So this is agenda we have at this moment to denounce, to make visible and have advocacy, knowing that the institutions by themselves, they won't have this strength of holding these people accountable if they did not feel the pressure on behalf of civil society for them to act according to the law and the right, and to hold these people accountable with this historical depth that we have with the crimes committed by authorities, by military people, which were never, have never paid for this. So this is the agenda we have been working on, and this is the way we see the possibility of holding accountable these people, and considering the important report made by the federal police in Brazil with all the elements that we gave visibility to it, we publicized for society to have access of what it is inside this report, the crimes that were committed by the former president and military people and other actors who participated in this tentative of coup in the criminal acts of January 8th in Brazil. I don't know if Diego wants to add something, but that's a bit of what we see from where we stand in Brazil. Yes, if you allow me very briefly, I think in dialogue with this dimension, this wider dimension of the rights violation, I think that in Brazil we have a big debate about holding big corporations accountable of human rights and violations, especially in themes related to mining. And I don't know if you have been following, but I think this is a very relevant case to think about in this collective, which is the case of the Brumadinho and Mariana Dam. So there was a tragedy. In reality, it's a crime with the lack of respect of the mining companies in the Rio Doce region in Minas Gerais. So it's a crime which is already more than 9 years. There were a dam broke down, over 200 people died through the mud that came, that destroyed cities, polluted the rivers, killed people from different decisions at national and international level. The Brazilian state has just made an agreement of holding accountability Samarco, which is a company formed by two other companies, Vale do Rio Doce, which was a state-owned company and now has an open capital, and the BHP, which is a British corporation, and now there is an action in London with with a process going on to holding accountable in the British jurisdiction, holding them accountable for a crime perpetrated in Brazil. Hearing to our colleagues that act so strongly, that spoke so beautifully, that inspire us, I think this kind of actions, we need to think about this, because many corporations that are based in North America or in Germany or in Britain, they come to Brazil and to many other countries of America and Africa mainly, I think. They make huge violations, and our judicial system hold them accountable in a very limited way. So our field of progressive lawyers has been thinking a lot about creating these levels of international process so that the foreigners can be held accountable in their origin for the crimes they practice in other territories. That's not going over other jurisdiction. Brazilian jurisdiction is effective, and the foreign jurisdiction can be complementary because it holds foreigners accountable in its home country. I think it's a very important theme, especially here in Brazil, in terms of the agrochemicals, the poison in agriculture. In Brazil, we have a lot of violation of human rights. Brazil is the biggest consumer of agrochemicals, of poison, which many of them are forbidden. Many of these chemicals are forbidden in other countries, and they are used in Brazil. So thinking about this international cooperation, I think this is really important. Another observation is, as Mara said, the action both in those cases of the dictatorship, but also in terms of human rights violations against indigenous peoples during the democratic period, condemnations in international tribunals such as the Inter-American Court on Human Rights has allowed the Brazilian state to assume its responsibilities and make a formal excuse, and also with compensation for the victims and communities. In the last years, we have managed to achieve several victories, especially in the name of Quilombola communities and indigenous communities with the space field of Alcântara. There's a North American base. I mean, it's really to launch satellites in the state of Maranhão, where there is just a decision where the Brazilian state had to ask forgiveness for the communities, had to give compensation and reparation measures. Yesterday there was in the news, it was the recognition of the Avaguarani people from Itaipu. Itaipu is the biggest hydroelectrical dam in Brazil. It's binational. It's from Brazil and Paraguay. So there's a recognition and reparation, demarcation of part of this territory of this indigenous people, trying to accommodate them in other places. So that goes in the dialogue about one of the questions about the work of advocacy, how to fund this kind of advocacy, which is a kind of activist advocacy which seeks the civil and monetary reparation of corporations and institutions and people that promote human rights violations.
Thank you so much. I want to thank all of you for these amazing panelists. I think this has been an incredible webinar, actually. We could go on and on. There are so many questions. We can keep the questions and actually refer them to our panelists. I think that one of the things that has come through with everyone is that lawyers and legal workers can't just work within the law, but have to be part of a vibrant and international movement for justice and have to be a part of organizations. And on that note, and in ending and in thanking everyone again, I urge all of you who are in the US to join the National Lawyers Guild, and you can go to nlg.org, and we also have an international committee, and I look forward to seeing all of you in our webinars in the future and hopefully in our organization. Thank you again so much, and now this webinar is concluded.
One more point. This is being recorded, and we'll let people know how they can access the recording, since it can be used in Brazil, since you can pick the Portuguese language selection for your comrades, and hopefully this will help us not only to stir greater internationalism amongst ourselves, but also to think about how we can, as lawyers and legal workers, really protect the social movements as best we can. So again, I thank everybody, and that's it.
Thank you. Bye.